All right, check. All right, everyone, quiet down. Welcome to the Royale. We are, I guess, this is the official Royale Political Wire in conjunction, of course, with Next STL. I'm sure you guys all listen to the podcast and subscribe, right? My name is Steve. I'm the owner of the Royale here. We've had a long tradition of doing this here, and this is not actually the first. I'm not the first owner who have done that. Mike will expound upon that. There's a long tradition of ward politics in this bar. Also, I am the sergeant at arms, so I will bounce you if necessary. All right, I have a background that can do that.
Strong arms.
I don't know, but so tonight is the 8th Ward debate, and I will let it over to the hosts here, of course, Maureen Hamlin and Michael Allen.
Hi, I'm Maureen Hamlin. I am a local woman, and that's myself. Michael, before this, someone asked, is Michael going to do one of those things where he gives us a little historical lecture? And I said, oh, he brought a book. So Michael is going to give us a little history of how things could really go down.
All right. Well, good evening. It's good to be here. Okay, so I am a historian. I teach at the Sam Fox School at Washington University, and they are completely responsible for my views and opinions expressed tonight. Can I have a show of hands? Who supports Paul Failer? Who supports Annie Rice? Who supports nobody and is here to decide who to support? Awesome. Well, we'll come back to that question at the very end of the night, but I did want to share briefly before Maureen asks the first scintillating, searing, provocative question. I wanted to share something out of this book, Mr. Mayor. Has anybody read this book? It's the autobiography of Alfonso J. Cervantes, two-term mayor of St. Louis who served between 1965 and 1973 before he was defeated in his bid for a third term. If you ask me, that's how we should treat politicians going for third terms. But no offense to either of you, but this is a third chapter. It's called Cuspidors and Flowers, the Amateur and the Brawling Alderman. I think the St. Louis American used the phrase Shaw Brawl to describe this race, but I think what was happening when Cervantes first entered politics was a lot more extreme and bare-knuckled, so we really don't know what it's like to have a real brawl. He announced his bid for alderman at Columbo's Tavern. So the opening night of my campaign, when I addressed the ward workers at Columbo's Tavern on Kings Highway, was notable for me because the Democratic candidate for mayor, Joe Doris, came by and shook my hand. But drinking beer with the hard-working precincts captains afterwards, I sized up the ethnic makeup of my supporters and their ladies who were sitting at a table with Carmen, his wife, etc., etc. Where's Columbo's Tavern? Anyone know?
Columbo's Tavern.
We are in Columbo's Tavern. Yeah. The birthplace not only of successful aldermanic campaigns, but future mayors.
And of course, we're now supporters, and ladies are actually just supporters. So thanks for that.
Now, one other thing about Cervantes, though. When he ran for alderman, the Republicans held the majority. Can you believe that? Hi, Jesse Irwin, if you're out there. But the Democrats formed a majority. They won. They swept in 1949. And this is where it gets bare-knuckled. The Republican city register, who had to swear in each alderman, refused to swear in the newly duly elected Democrats so the Republicans could pretend to hold on to a majority for another 2 weeks. So if you think the shit flies at the Board of Aldermen, it really it's not flying that high as it did in 1949. When the Republicans tried to block duly elected aldermen from taking office, I think everything we're going to talk about tonight is way more civil than that. So, but just to test that, we'll turn to Maureen Hamlin.
To test that. So we're actually, can everyone hear us? If you can hear us, say, hell yeah. If you can hear us, say, fuck Donald Trump. Okay, great. Okay, so I think what we are going to do, rather than me barrel in with questions, we're going to let the candidates make some opening remarks. So the way we're going to do this for tonight is candidates get 2 minutes for opening and then a minute for each of our questions. We do reserve the right to come back if a candidate completely refused to answer the question that we posed. We're We're going to leave it up to us to determine what the definition of completely refused means, and then we're going to allow a brief closing, maybe a minute at the end. So,
Great. And can I add one more housekeeping
Yes.
bit? Some of you have submitted questions already online, and we hope to get to as many of those as we can. If there are additional questions, you can fill out an index card here with an ink pen and send it in, and we will make every effort to ask it tonight. It can be personal, it can be political, it can be spiritual, it can be intellectual.
or you can comment
Comment
on
on Facebook, and we will be watching that and monitoring that the whole night. But for now, we'll turn to the candidates.
If it's a boring question, we might not ask it, to be honest. But if it's interesting, send it in. Candidates, please. Let's start with Thaler, because that's the way the alphabet goes.
You can call me Paul Maureen.
Paul.
That's fine. Okay, my name is Paul Thaler, and first and foremost, I want to thank Steve and the Royale, not only for tonight, but because they have consistently held these kind of events and made this possible. I want to thank everyone who's here for caring enough to come and learn more or become part of the process. So I know a lot of people here, but for those of you who don't know me, my name is Paul Thaler. I'm the Democratic candidate for Alderman in the 8th Ward, the ferocious 8th Ward, as we were called by the St. Louis Post-Dispatch in the 1930s. My training is in geography, GIS, demography, spatial statistics. Some people hate it, some people love it. Demography is the study of large groups of people and the study of how to get them what they need. So shortly after that, I moved to Los Angeles to work for a software company. I didn't particularly enjoy Los Angeles or the software company, but that's a good place to start working in documentary film. So I made 2 films that you probably have never heard of, but was looking for an excuse to come back to the city where I grew up. So has anybody here seen, I made a film in 2011 called The Pruitt-Igoe Myth. By show of hands, has anyone seen that film? That's very encouraging. Thank you so much. So you all know a little piece of my heart, and you know that that is my love letter to this city. I am unapologetically in love with this city, with all 62 square miles, with all 80 some odd neighborhoods, with all 28 wards, and I have deep love and affection for all 317,000 people. Since then, realizing I couldn't top the Pruitt-Igoe myth, I got back into what I was trained in, data analysis. I've worked with the For the Sake of All project, which was an informer of, but also an inheritor of the Ferguson Commission report. I've done data analysis for that and for several other things. My passion is for seeing needs in my own 8th Ward and in the city of St. Louis, and also as our region as a whole, and addressing them. It's in every single effort that I've expended in doing so, I've been paid back 1,000-fold by just great friendships and great love and appreciation, and I'm thankful for that. Thank you.
All right, Annie.
Hi, I'm Annie Rice, and I'm running to be your first 8th Ward Alderwoman. By day, I'm an immigration attorney. I work with families of all different kinds, searching out what their needs are and how we can best meet those within a really complicated legal system. I did my undergraduate work across the river in Illinois, studying urban and cross-cultural ministry. I wanted to be a missionary, and I realized through the course of that study that mission work is in your community. You don't have to go somewhere else to do work in the community, and that led me to a number of different jobs and to law school. And when I moved back to St. Louis, or I moved to St. Louis, I was looking to move close to family, for a thriving immigrant community, and a place where I could really dig in and get involved. St. Louis is an amazing place full of incredible people who are looking to move things forward, and we've got so much potential, and it feels like we're always right on the edge of something, and there's room for everybody to get involved and help move this forward. And that's what I want to do as an alderman as well. It's about being responsive, it's about being present and accountable, and it's about making policy that moves us forward as a city, so that we're working together as an energetic and engaged 8th Ward. That's one of the things that's really cool about our 8th Ward is we've got people that are engaged on all sorts of activism and nonprofit organizations and doing things in all of their collective spheres, and to be able to lead that forward is a really exciting challenge. And then working to make policy that works for the city of St. Louis. That's also a passion, is that if something is not working for you in your neighborhood, then it's probably not working well for someone else in another neighborhood. And how do we work together to make those things work for everybody on the same level? So thank you so much for having me tonight.
So question number one, when reviewing some of the discussion from the Monday night forum, a forum in which a technique often used in the Royale podcast, the lightning round, was also used, I will note. Both of you spoke about the planned ward reduction, and both of you kind of voiced some concerns you had about how there wasn't a plan in place, and kind of sounded a little negative, one could say, about the idea of undertaking a ward reduction. Now, as an alderman, whichever one of you is elected is going to be, in fact, the actual person tasked, or one of the people tasked, with planning out a ward reduction. So you will no longer be just critical of the process, you will be engaged in the process. So how do you plan to do that? Are you going to be engaged in the process of planning the ward reduction? Are you going to be calling for more elections? What is your plan for that? Start with Annie.
Okay. Thanks. So one of the things that I said on Monday is that 74% of the 8th Ward voted in favor of ward reduction, and that's really important to understand as we go forward in this process. I'm really interested in sitting on the legislative committee. I know that's up to President Reed to decide on that, but to be a part of that committee, to actually pull some of that responsibility for drawing those lines out of that committee. I don't think that aldermen should be drawing their own lines. It's something that we criticize political parties all over the country for doing, is drawing their own lines to best suit them. And I think that's best left to a nonpartisan or a citizen commission, a judicial commission, to make that happen. So I know that there have been some discussions. There's a bill that it looks like it was introduced last year by Alderman Cohn that's been sitting in the legislative committee, not moving anywhere, I don't think, but talking about putting together a citizen commission to see how this goes forward. So if it is not back up on the ballot again, then yes, we've got to do this, and we have to keep moving forward and pushing for actual strategies in place as if reduction is going to happen. If it comes back up on the ballot, I support our right to vote on that again as well.
Paul?
So just for clarification, we will not, any alder won't have an individual say on ward reduction, but we'll have something to say on redistricting. Traditionally, that's been handled by seniority. Whoever you elect will have no seniority, and we'll have no say on that. So it's in that certain way it is moot. In another way, I also work in GIS and in spatial statistics, and I have very strong opinions on how we might draw those lines. There are plans in place, if we could implement them through a judicial commission or through some other mechanism, that could reasonably agnostically draw these lines and just piss everyone off by being mean equally to all of them. We could do that if we wanted to. And we should do that at the state level. There are many states, Arizona, California spring to mind, that have done this agnostic or quasi-agnostic method of redrawing the lines. The party in power, and in St. Louis, which party is in power? The Democratic Party devours each other because we don't have a Republican enemy to face. In the supermajority that we have in Jeff City, the Republicans absolutely draw the lines in terrible, terrible ways that do a disservice to all of our constituents and us. To be fair, when we had the majority, we did the same thing. So this is not a cut and dried kind of thing. But when we reduce, and it will probably be the case, as Annie mentioned, it went 74% in our ward. It's very popular. It might be on the ballot again. But it is most likely that we will reduce to 14 wards. That will be a bloodbath. And if the brawl in the 8th is a disappointment to you, and I apologize for that, if it's a disappointment to you, you will have a brawl in 28 or in 14 wards, whatever it is. That will absolutely happen. There must be some kind of outside commission that can draw these lines agnostically, or else, our city might just implode with the sheer amount of drama that goes on. So that's what we have to have happen.
All right. Well, I think one of the traditions of aldermanic debates at the Royale started the frequent recurrence of the cycle. So we've had several special elections in the 15th, finally leading to Megan Green, who I think is in the House, getting the seat. We had an 8th ward debate here not less than 3 years ago. So I want to ask each of you, since the 8th ward race was contested in very recent history, did either of you take a side in that race? Which side, and what was your role or participation working for the candidate of your choice?
I think it's time to start with Paul.
Yes.
So in that race, and that was between Alderman Conway, who retired, or not retired, sorry, moved on to another position 4 months ago, and Kevin McKinney. I actually, and Michael can back me up on this, had aspirations to be in that race, and went and talked to actually Ogilvy as well. He's here. I had all sorts of people that I was trying to talk to about how this would be how I could move forward. Didn't have a love match with Kevin McKinney. That was not the case that he and I saw eye to eye on some things. And Conway, I was the recent safety committee chair, and he took me on a ride through the ward. And the purpose was definitely to dissuade me from running for alderman. He pointed on every block to 6 and 7 houses, and he said, well, you know, the Joneses used to live there, and then the Jacksons bought it in 1993. The subtext clearly was, do you know how to do this job? And I looked into my own soul and I said, you know, I might know one person on every block of half of my neighborhood, not the 15 people on every block of every neighborhood in the ward. And so, I mean, it did a pretty fair job of terrifying me about my ability to do that job. So for the last 3 years, I took that message to heart. I needed to know more people. In order to know what's going on in your ward, you have to have people that are reporting. There's some people that will never tell you anything and don't know to go to their alderman for anything. So you have to know the one person on every block who knows everyone's business. And then you've got to know 3 of them so that they can report to you what's really happening on that block so you can address those concerns. I was not ready back then. Oh, so I worked as his campaign manager, is the direct answer. For a very paltry sum, I will also mention, but it was not, I also didn't do all that much. I probably earned every penny I got. But in the process of doing that, it taught me that I needed to know more people. I needed to know them more intimately. I needed to be more responsive to people and to know somebody at every block. So that was my role in that election.
Annie?
I supported Kevin McKinney, and it was, you know, it was something. It was a contest between, you know, 2 people who were, I mean, obviously very passionate about what was going on, and I just identified more with McKinney's policies that he was advocating for, kind of his vision for where to go, and you know, and that was. Yeah, I didn't do any active work on his campaign, but did support him when we came through these forums and things like that. But and voted for him at the polls.
Okay, next question. Have you ever been arrested, detained, questioned, or in any other way interacted with the police as a criminal defendant rather than a educated politician? And if you have not ever acted with the police in that way, how do you plan to build empathy and perspective for members of your ward that may do so? So Annie, it's your turn. That sounds like a question off an immigration form, and it's actually the exact order of those. I'm not okay. So besides getting pulled over for speeding and 16 out in the country, the only other interactions that I've had. Sort of in a defensive state, have been protesting. So out when the police are out on the streets and we're out on the streets and working to ensure. You know, my role kind of this latest time around was jail support, waiting outside the jail until 5 a.m. to make sure that people are getting out, making sure people that had health complications were getting listened to, that kind of thing, and then. And just, you know, keeping an eye on things and where we were going and that our people were safe as we were walking. And I think, so, you know, I haven't ever had any major, you know, issues with the police as myself to defend myself.
it's something that we at the firm do all the time. We do civil rights litigation. We have represented protesters from Ferguson on forward, and understanding, there's a relationship there that has to be built with law enforcement as part of a community, but also understanding that people can't be targeted, people can't be harassed, understanding the national landscape of how this works and our very divided local landscape of the racial biases, racial interactions with the police, and we have tons of reports on that. So building empathy, I try to listen as much as possible when people are telling their stories, and that's something we do with our clients all the time. So I feel like I have a pretty good ability to put myself, not necessarily in their shoes, but in an empathetic way to be able to interact. So.
Maureen, could you repeat the question, please?
Have you ever been arrested, detained, questioned, or in any way interacted with the police in a defensive stance? And if not, how would you build empathy with those in your ward who may?
So this one time, I've had minimal interaction with police, and I'll be the first to tell you, shrouded by white male privilege. So my outcomes should not be taken as though they would have been the same had they been different. But one time I did jump the fence at the Natatorium and was arrested for trespassing because I swam at night. If that, dissuades. Also another time, probably I was a kid and I remember spending a night in jail because we were throwing fireworks out of our car. These are things that were regrettable as youthful indiscretion that harmed no one and caused no damage. But my interaction with the police in those two things were, stern, but probably I was given a more charitable way to go with things because of, certain privilege. I was, at the first one, I was at a college, and as a white man at college, I'm sure that insulated me from some of the negative consequences. I want to be very upfront with that. But no felonious things, no things that would shock or appall you, unless you hate swimming at night in a pool. So.
All right. I'm going to follow up. Obviously, the 8th Ward and the Shaw neighborhood in particular is familiar with the events in 2014 when Jason Flannery, officer in the St. Louis Police Department, who's since been disciplined for other offenses outside of this incident, shot and killed Von Derrick Myers. Several questions have come in from residents in the 8th Ward on what the standard of review and conduct should be for private security. I guess Flora Place is probably the only private security district in the ward, but how the ward, is there another one?
Southwest Garden.
Southwest Garden. So how these, then more generally, then how the public should be able to have review of the conduct of officers working, both police officers and private staff for these security organizations. What should be the role of the ward's citizens in that review, and how should discipline be handled? A lot of people obviously feel like what happened with Von Derrick Myers was not resolved in a very beneficial way for the community. Paul.
Also, the Flora Place CID, an officer who was a sworn officer of the law that was working over the CID, pursued Von Derrick Myers from Flora to the gangway between at Shaw and Clem, and there was an interaction that resulted in a young man's being shot and killed. The specific question about the role of review that ward residents could have over the CID is, I think, fairly minimal, but I also would entertain any kind of ideas that one might have to have that. One important thing that we have to keep in mind with, especially, I anticipate that there might be a question about the memorial, anticipating that, and I'll go into that more later if you'd like, is that whatever other reaction that the people in the Shaw neighborhood of the 8th Ward had to that event, people bound together and realized whatever they would disagree upon, that a family was grieving, and a grieving family is a grieving family. And even people that were on all sides of that made sure that, there were buckets of stew and soup and everything cooked for people. It's not the case that we can plunge ahead in these things in a heartless way or in a doctrinaire way or in a very rigid way, because we all were aware that we were dealing with a grieving family. As far as remedy that can come from the residents, the remedy should come from circuit attorney and from internal affairs. That's the way that we should pursue those things. And whether that was done or not, I'm not privy to. But a citizen's remedy would be, I suppose, to, in the extreme, dissolve the CID. But I don't hear from my residents any clamoring calls to do so.
Annie.
So I believe there's still a wrongful death lawsuit pending against the Flora Place CID, and so they're dealing with the ramifications of a private security officer who was involved in a killing while on their duty. So it'll be interesting to see how that goes. I know it's been pending for a long time. It's a complicated process because these are generally officers who are police officers who are currently working as police officers, but then are working a secondary job on private security, and there's different standards of review for a company versus the police department. But if the person is acting in their official capacity as a police officer, then they should be subject to the same type of review, which Officer Flannery was. It went through the circuit attorney's office, and Jennifer Joyce declined to press charges. But we also didn't have an active COB at the time. We didn't have a civilian oversight board. We still don't have a civilian oversight board with subpoena power. And I would be interested in seeing how far that goes into their actions just as private security, right? So if because this incident happened off of Flora Place, it was technically outside of his patrol area as private security, but as a St. Louis police officer, there are roles they play even when they're off duty, and they have responsibilities even when they're off duty. They have the right to pursue things that they see in certain circumstances. And I have some questions about that initial stop when Officer Flannery first encountered Von Derek Myers that night, and then that kind of spins my perspective on what happened at that corner. But so there's an official capacity question, and then there's the private security, and I think when it's private, it's up to the CID to decide whether or not they want to continue with that. But I think there should be oversight into private security in general, right? Where, especially when you have officers who are connected to a police department at the moment, how then can we review their actions? Because if they're acting in an official capacity, then we should be able to review them in an official capacity. And that comes back to the Civilian Oversight Board.
I just want to remind the room that you can write down questions for the candidates by coming up and getting an index card from the man whose hand is up right now. And then I want to ask a brief follow-up yes or no answer, real short, from each of you. Do each of you support the Civilian Oversight Board getting subpoena power?
Yes.
Yes, with reservations that ironically intensify its subpoena power. Yes, once we've worked out problems that might actually impede the ability to prosecute police or anyone, it needs to be tightened up. But notionally, yes, 100%.
Okay, I want to shift gears a little bit to talk about the hottest topic in St. Louis outside of concrete balls, and that is tax abatement. Side note, we are all a depressingly nerdy group of citizens here in the city. Okay, so tax abatement. Here's a question that was submitted. Would you commit, and we will hold you accountable by Steve refusing to serve you drinks at the Royale in the future if you violate this, would you commit to not sponsoring tax abatements for single-family residents with projected sales prices over 200% of the city's median home value? Would you commit to doing that? And if you would not commit to doing that, is there some tax abatement commitment you can make here tonight? Again, enforceable by Stephen Fitzpatrick Smith. I think Paul's first.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. So do you want me to read it one more time?
Yes, please.
Commit to not sponsoring tax abatements for single-family residences if the projected sales price of that single-family residence is above 200% of the city's median home value.
Gotcha.
Would you commit to that?
Total parcel, improved parcel. I mean, for the meeting, it's important. I'm not trying to be.
The questioner is not here tonight, so
Okay.
answer how you will.
So I might have two different answers. Well, so TIF and tax abatement needs. This is the short answer. Sorry. Am I not short
You
answering?
gotta. They took our lightning round thing, so you gotta just say. You just get a minute.
Sure. Well, so if that could be done unilaterally, then I would. But here's the thing: I would be doing a disservice to the 8th Ward if I couldn't have some kind of cooperation from the 10th, from the 7th, from the 6th, from the 15th. The fact is, if one was to do that, and we have this, what I described in the podcast as a perverse incentive. If Ward X, Y, and Z exist, and Ward X and Y are thriving and built out and are have a rising housing market, and Ward Z has none of these things, X and Y have no business telling Z that we should do away with TIF and tax abatement. So, and that's been true for a long time. So traditionally what we do is X and Y says, well, Z has a point. Let's just keep doing what we're doing. But then X and Y have a perverse incentive to poach one another. So any alder or alder candidate who would commit to such a thing is committing to having disparate development. As far as whether that should happen, as stated by the questioner, absolutely. There has not been a comprehensive planning document in this city in how long, Michael? Probably 20 years or more?
1947.
Oh, wow. So, a little bit more than 20. But we've not had that comprehensive planning document that's going to guide our use of Chapter 99 and 353. Now, 99 is not employed in the Shaw neighborhood and is not in danger of being employed with that. But, I mean, you ask a good question. The right answer, I realize for the people in this room, the right answer is yes, I will commit to that. But anyone who says, yes, I will commit to that, is committing to it's a zero-sum game at the end of the day. Unless everyone else commits to that, why would I disadvantage my neighbors by saying I am the person, this young, plucky 8th Ward alderman that is going to take on the world, is going to do that? They're not doing you a service if they do that. So, I mean, the answer is no. But the answer is yes, that we should commit to that. But I'm going to be the person, I'm going to be the little Dutch boy with his finger in the dam, It's
You look kind of Dutch, to be honest with you.
Appreciate it.
How much is 200%?
200% of regional median?
We're talking in abstracts, but if we had real numbers, it might.
Yeah, I apologize that I didn't bring the median home values for every home in the city.
According to Zillow, the median home value is $127,000.
127,000. So now we're up to $250,000.
All right, Annie?
It's very worthy. Oh, sorry.
So, I think we need to have a plan. We need to have a plan that everyone across the city is committing to when we're making these judgments on where incentives are used, right? And we, in the 8th Ward, we've used a lot of incentives. We've used a lot of tax abatements. But it also matters where that property is coming in, right? Is it a cornerstone property that is going to then move an area forward? Is it truly blighted in a way that it not just meets the legal definition when we assign it that, but is actually blighted and does actually deserve that sort of increase? My commitment is to there's no blanket tax abatements. That is an easy commitment to make and say I want people to come and make their case, and I want that for everyone at the Board of Aldermen. Until we have a plan that says this is how we're going to use these citywide, then everyone needs to come and say this is why they actually need this. Not I leveled a home, there's an empty plot, we're going to assess it at an empty plot level, and then we're going to abate it and build a $500,000 home there, right? Like, you can't. We're past the point of letting those things slide past us just because it doesn't happen in our wards. And so I think asking hard questions and saying, can you prove to us that this is actually necessary, right? Because when we're looking to reform these areas, we have to prove that there's a need. And that's the most important thing to me, is proving that there's a need. And in the 8th Ward, we have areas that there may still be a need. Shaw's probably not one of them unless there's significantly more going on inside that we can't see from the outside.
All right. I just want to point out, in fairness, there is a drink you can order at the Royale called the tax abatement.
It's an old-fashioned, and the house serves you a glass of water, a splash of sugar, and a lemon rind, and the bartender keeps the whiskey. So, order one tonight if you dare. You know, and eventually, some of that whiskey gets trickled down into the tax base,
Yeah.
Sure.
if the bartender chooses. But
None to the kids though.
That's a
the
bad image. Anyway.
anyway, another question. So, looking through the Missouri Ethics Commission reports for each candidate, and I'm not trying to.
Released yesterday.
I'm not going to fan flames, but on Anna, your report, there are contributions from Tishara Jones and Vervis Jones. Paul, on your report, there is a relationship with the Kelly Group. Tishara Jones ran for mayor in the last cycle. Kelly Group worked for Lyda Cruson. Obviously, it was a very close and contested election, and some of the flames from that race have not died down. To what extent is this race a proxy war or any kind of reenactment of that set of relationships? Relitigation, says the lawyer, the law student here.
That's my turn, right? So
And I'm not
I think that's
trying to be glib.
Sure. No, I mean that's an interesting thing to pull from the reports. It's the contributions from Tishara and Vervis were a very small part of a. I think we had 170. Maybe the number wrong, but separate contributions from folks. At least 90 people in the 8th Ward that have given to my campaign. So. Just because Tishara is on there does not make this a direct proxy war. I will say, when in the mayoral primary, in the Democratic primary, Tishara did win 47% of the votes in the 8th Ward, and that somewhat felt like a proxy war. That mayoral primary, when you had Alderman Conway supported Lyda, and then the 8th Ward voted 47% for Tishara, there was a significant sort of message that felt like it was being sent there. And so, whether this is directly that, that was a there were a few more candidates in that race, so you can't make a direct comparison on that. But there's something to be said for something different, something outside, a little more unexpected, a little more different avenue to get to this role. So I wouldn't call it a direct proxy war. There are some comparisons, and I'm grateful to have Tishara's support. I'm grateful to have Vervis's support. I'm grateful for all of the support that was present on the MEC report.
I would call it a proxy war, and I think it's pretty ridiculous that this far down on the chain that I'm getting steamrolled by people who I have no beef with at all. And I'll also point out, and this is not to put my opponent on blast, but we handed out together a green ballot that had you endorsing Lyda. We are, if anyone is unclear, who's in the 8th Ward? Will you raise your hand, please, just for whatever? Who thinks they might be in the 8th Ward but are not sure? Come find me after. All right. So the 8th Ward Democrats are an open ward, one of very few in the city. And the way that we roll is that we exercise what's called democratic centralism, where we all come together and we all argue behind closed doors, and fists are only rarely thrown, but we come up with the person that we endorse. In the case of Prop P, it can be very narrow. It was 20-17. In the case of Lyda versus Tishara, it was less narrow, but still contested. And then afterwards, we all agree that we are putting our name behind whoever it was. And admirably, I think, and it's the most democratic way. In the 7th Ward, they give you tickets based on, you get 3 votes to 0.5 votes based on how many polls you worked or whatever. This is one person, one vote. And if you come and you have your $5 and you pay for it, pay for your membership for that year, your vote counts as much as the committee person as the alder person. And after all that fight is over, we endorse a candidate. So, and in that privacy of that voting booth, you can do whatever you want. But my opponent passed out Lyda lit with her name on it. That's just simply the case. Now, what you voted on that booth, that's fine. But proxy war, back to that. Yeah, so I have been, I think, kind of mistreated by some news outlets. I think that they've given kind of a slanted picture, and reporting on arguments between supporters on Facebook is not going to win any Pulitzer Prizes. I'm very sure of it. I don't know how I got on the bad side, but this, proxy war is not inaccurate. I'm not going to say that you're wrong.
Short follow-up. What are the dues to the 8th Ward Democrats?
that we just raised them to $10 a year.
All right.
So, can I respond on that? So, yes. So, one of the rules with the Eighth Ward Independent Democrat organization was once a Democrat was endorsed by the organization, then we supported that. And so, I was doing my due diligence to do that. And so, yes, my name was on a ballot that had Lyda as our endorsed candidate in that race. And so that's not something that I'm trying to hide from by any means, because that was the role in which I was in. I think that's, I'm not hiding from
And
this.
maybe it's obvious, but is your name on a ballot endorsing Paul for alderman right
I
now?
was going to
No, it is
follow up
not.
on that.
No,
Okay.
it is not.
Okay.
So I have a quick follow-up to that just because I want to make sure that we kind of cover this. So I think, obviously, some of us on Facebook, some of us are not, some of us have our brother texting us things. He says on Facebook, maybe that's just me. Michael, I don't know if you're here. So, I think, obviously, I think contributions to both of you have become, there's been, I would say for each of you, a flashpoint about contributions. So for Annie, it was the large contribution from Dave Bogar. And, for Paul, I think today people had a lot of questions about the Kelly Group loan.
It was not alone.
So I would say 1 minute, explain your perspective on each. Go
Well,
ahead.
you saw my response to that. I responded to it pretty convincingly.
Give it, in case people are not following Facebook.
in case you're not following,
Yeah.
well, if you're not following Facebook, then you've not heard any of this, so there's nothing to respond to. So it's moot.
If a tree falls in the woods.
So a man named Glenn Burley, who is, I will say, a crafty, wizened veteran, who even his friends would say probably is, I wouldn't say stretches the truth, I will say is antagonistic. We wouldn't?
So, Paul,
You
continue.
got a mouse in your pocket, or who you speaking for? I think even his friends would say that. Intimated that because on my MEC report, I marked that I owed $9,000 to the Kelly Group, that somehow that was going to be forgiven, and Putin was funding my race, and this was dark money or something like that. The fact of the matter is, when you file your MEC report, you have to report who you owe money to. That debt has been paid. It was paid very quickly after that. For the record, the Kelly Group has designed my mailers and mailed them to people, and suggested me putting the 2 little yellow stripes on my lawn sign. That's the extent of my. They're people in my employ. They mail things to you so that you can, take them from your front door and throw them away in your trash can, having hopefully read them slightly. But the notion that was something sinister was absolutely ridiculous. I think that Glenn was satisfied by my answer. Anyway, I'll post it to you if you want, but it was a ridiculous assertion. And and besides that, like you said, there was funding controversies about me.
The Kelly, I think that, and then I think there is a question about the Steve Conway's contribution to you.
Steve Conway gave me $2,000. Is there a controversy around that? All right.
Annie?
Sure. So, I'm very comfortable with the people that have donated to my campaign. Like I said, we have 90 different people in the 8th Ward that have contributed, and the larger contribution from Dave Boger, who is a longtime 8th Ward resident, who is a dedicated citizen, who stands on the corner of Shaw and Clem with the Black Lives Matter sign. Candidates, especially female candidates, have a hard time raising money. And if you look at the MEC reports of donors that have given to, say, state reps, and they give 5-10 times as much to male candidates as they do to female candidates. And in these elections, we have campaign finance limits. I have followed those. Everything that I've got is out, is public, is there for you to read. I invite you to go read that. There have been times that I've been given money that I've given back because I did not agree with that person's politics. I didn't agree with their stances on things. And it's important to me to know that the money that's coming in, I'm not. It's a perspective issue. That if I have a question about whether this is going to make me look like I'm tied to something or something like that, I'm comfortable giving that money back. And I think that stands that helps me when I'm talking to other donors as well to say, listen, I'm approaching you for money because I believe in you, because I believe that you believe in me. And I'm grateful to have someone who believes in me enough to give me a significant amount of money from someone who he's retired and he was gifted some money from his mother that passed. This is not a real estate tycoon. This is not a developer. He's a nice man who works really hard for the 8th Ward. So.
All right, moving along. I'm a historian, and I am not quite certain if St. Louis has an official city song. There doesn't seem to be any record of that. So I'm assuming there isn't one, but we can go through the past ordinances at the St. Louis Public Library and the St. Louis Room on the 3rd floor. Beautiful history room. Every ordinance ever recorded is in there. Haven't read them all. But
Michael, why
if
not?
we're going to pass a new St. Louis City song, what song would you try to introduce through legislation to be the new song of St. Louis? I guess we start with Paul, start with Annie.
That is... Wow.
It doesn't have to be 8th Ward specific.
Yeah, well,
Although
yeah, that's...
ballads about Henry Shaw's slaves running away across the river, probably not.
Yeah,
a
probably.
fan.
Let's not do that one.
Songs about the pavilions in Tower Grove Park.
By the way, this was a real submitted question, just in case
It is.
anyone
This
is
is
This is
real.
creative. I like it. So, off the
Not
top
everybody's
of my head,
foot is in the mud, you know.
right?
People are
Off the top of my
dreaming.
head, I'm just going to throw back to high school, where at my high school homecoming dance, they played country grammar 4 times. So let's go ahead and there you go. I'm with Nellie on this one.
All right.
I have long advocated for country grammar to be our. I'm glad that we found this commonality. I really am. I love that song to death. And it's played at every family reunion I go to, and it's always the highlight of the family reunion. St. Louis Blues is probably by W.C. Handy is probably something that deserves to be considered as well. Fast fact: St. Louis Blues, composed by W.C. Handy, native of Memphis. Our most famous song, arguably, came from somebody from Memphis, and their most favorite song, Memphis, Tennessee, composed by Chuck Berry, somebody from our city. And we have a W.C. Handy Park. We need to celebrate that. But clearly, and I'm glad to build consensus, country grammar is the answer to that question, for sure.
Okay, so
Somehow I think once upon a time Cervantes would have said Bob Cuban in the Inman, the cheater. So
You're going to have to send me that, Michael. I'm not familiar.
nobody in this room's old enough.
unlike Michael, who is ancient and timeless. Okay, so when 8th Ward candidates, when is the last time you rode either the Metro bus or the Metro Link personally? And what do you think our city needs to do to improve transportation policy?
Sure. Did somebody shout out 30 bus? Awesome. I haven't ridden the 30 bus in 2 weeks, but I rode the 80 bus last week to go to Metro. I, for 9 years, had no car and depended primarily first just on bus transit. I didn't use the Metro that much. Bus transit and pedestrian transit. That was the way I got around, but for about 3 years exclusively. And then for the next 6 years, I discovered an invention from the 19th century. It was called a bicycle, and that really amplified my reach in the city. It took me 3 years and some undiagnosed level of autism, but I decided that I was going to ride every street in the city. Every block of every street. There's 1,800 miles of streets in this city. Yeah. Oh, and people are like, "Oh, you rode up there?" It's like, yeah, no, it was fun. We had a great time. If you ever feel like this city is too small, if you ever feel like maybe I do want to move to Chicago, give yourself 3 years and commit to riding down every street in the city. It will put a smile on your face every day. You will meet people that you would not have met earlier. But the questions about transit. Transit infrastructure is very, very important. North-South Metro is clearly a priority, but people have to know that when we budget something like $20 million, that's for a study. For something that's going to be completed in 2038, I mean, you have to put down deep roots here if you want to get the payoff for this North-South Metro link. It's going to cost $1 billion. It's about $127 million for light rail per linear mile. And if we're going to make something that's going to be useful and make it as ambitious as it should be, so it could serve as many people as it should be, it's going to require federal funding. That would be 130% of our city's budget for a year. We can't afford it on our own. We have to get Trump out. We have to get somebody else in who cares about infrastructure, and then we can have that conversation. But it's absolutely essential shoring up our transit infrastructure. It's something I'm passionate about, something I'm committed to.
I think the last time I took the bus in the metro was to the airport, and I did try. Citizens for Modern Transit does a try and ride program that, if you're interested in that, it's a great way to get to know the buses and Metrolink here. And I live on the 80 bus line, and I was working close to where the 80 bus line went to, and I tried to do that, and then the bus was 5 minutes late one day. It was 5 minutes early another day. I'm an attorney. I've got to get to court. I've got to get to other buildings around town, and it wasn't feasible to continue using that. It wasn't user friendly enough for me to get to where I needed to go. And I think the 8th Ward has the 70 bus line runs right down the middle of it. It's the highest traffic or highest density use of any of the bus lines in the city, and we know that buses right now, that yes, Metrolink is incredibly expensive, but our bus frequency is also expensive, but is something that directly connects people to get to the Metrolink, get to the light rail, and working to prioritize and make those more efficient, more frequent. I think the guidelines are about every 12 minutes. If we could get buses on 12 minutes, then people can get to where they need to go. Your transfer times are less, all of that, and that's 12 minutes is a goal. It is not something that you can snap your fingers and make, because it's incredibly expensive to make buses run that frequent as well. But it's something that connects people to their jobs, to their schools, to their family. It determines where people live, where development comes in, and so we have to have bi-states working on a plan. There was a group that was promoting a modal study that was down at City Hall a couple of weeks ago, talking about things that they could do to make our streets more bike friendly, more pedestrian friendly, connecting sort of our routes of our arteries where people are getting to and from things. And so we seem to be moving in that direction. I know it's always a little bit of an uncomfortable time when a new bike lane comes in and they shorten where we can drive. You take a lane away, you get a little bit of a road diet there, and it takes some time to get used to. But those are the types of things that are moving us forward in the 21st century here, and the type of urban environment that I think we all want to live in.
May I follow up briefly, and I'll give complimentary time as well.
Very briefly.
Sure, yeah. One of the reasons that we live in the 3 neighborhoods that we have, one of the reasons that that we are so attractive to people that are commuting to anywhere else is our transit infrastructure. We have the 80, we have the 16, we have the 72, the 95. We have all of these ways to get to where you want to go. We have to maintain those. We have to expand those so that it can be more egalitarian citywide. But we are located in the 8th Ward. If you live in the 8th Ward, in one of the most transit-friendly places on earth. And if you are scared of the bus, then call me and I will ride the bus with you. We will explore the whole system. It's fantastic.
We still have our gaps as well. We have people who are in Tower Grove East who can't get over to our ward meetings because the bus is to get from where they are on Arsenal Street to get to St. Margaret of Scotland, where we have our meetings. I think she said it takes about 40 minutes to do that with the transfer in there. And so we are in the middle of it, but there are ways that we need to be able to optimize that as well.
Right. Speaking of transportation infrastructure, we have a couple comments here about the concrete balls, as Maureen so memorably phrased
balls,
it.
as I think.
Now those are in the 6th Ward. But some of the traffic studies that went into deciding whether or not to use those for calming measures suggested that if other north-south routes were more accessible to the 6th Ward, like maybe Tower Grove Avenue through the Shaw neighborhood, those measures might not have been necessary. I also think about something Vince Schamel once told me, which is that when Shaw put in the street closures at the east and west ends, that the neighborhood was fully divided. It was not an easy decision like people might assume. And he went to a public meeting in St. Margaret of Scotland, and it was contentious, and there seemed to be no majority. So it was Monday night, and Monday Night Football was on, so he told the priest to have them line up on one wall or the other and count them, and he was going to go watch Monday Night Football until the count was finished. And when he came back, there was like 51 people for it and 50 people against it, and they decided to close the streets. I'm exaggerating the numbers, but it was something very, very razor thin. So if you're elected, under what circumstances would you consider reversing any of these closures in the Shaw area and other parts of the 8th Ward? And in what circumstances would you consider making any new modifications, not only to the street system, but I think the undersung sort of part of the system, the alleys as well, which often get closed or appropriated by private businesses, but do both of these belong to the public people as common infrastructure?
Sure. So I'm going to go ahead and say that I'm on board with Ingracia balls, not sleigh balls, because sometimes the ladies need to talk about the balls as well. And so when the traffic
We
studies
ain't
happens,
seen it yet. Hats, mustaches.
Yeah,
you know,
the
it's all
Googly
com-
eyes.
Googly
Shout out
eyes.
Tiffany Mulligan.
Yes.
Just kidding.
So when the traffic study was taking place, the 6th and the 15th were both working together on that. And I approached Alderman Conway and said, hey, why aren't we participating in this study? We overlap with them. We have all of these challenges. We've got roads that are cut off. We've got people complaining about not being able to get into the neighborhood, not being able to get out of the Shaw neighborhood. And the areas that we share with the 6th and the 15th, or that we border on, it would make a whole lot more sense if we were doing this together. And he said that it was incredibly expensive, and Christine has said that as well, that even just getting Compton was equal to kind of the whole of the block of Tower Grove South because of where the density of that and how the amount of cars that come through that and all of that. So it would have been beneficial had we done the traffic study at the same time, because we would know then for sure how these things really affect each other. And right now, aldermen sort of have their own say as far as a stop sign goes in here, this turns into a one-way here, and it, again, like another need for a city plan of how do we move traffic, right? I'm not a traffic engineer. I won't pretend to be a traffic engineer. I hope that there are plenty of people who are much smarter about this than I am, who I can go to and say, what actually makes sense here? What makes the most fiscal sense? What gets people to where they need to go? And in Shaw, one of the prime areas that is ripe for a test of reopening is the Thurman underpass. And there are some balls there that cannot be attributed to Christine Gracia, but those are there. They were put in and they were expensive to put in, but that was even another contentious, just closing that one. But we cut off an entire neighborhood, and so a lot of the growth and business and traffic, people moving through that area was cut off, and I think we need to work at being better neighbors to open these thoroughfares so that people can get to and from, and that brings business back specifically into the Shaw neighborhood. They are going to be long, difficult conversations with the neighbors who live in the areas that are now cul-de-sacs, right? That is, if you bought your home there and it's a cul-de-sac and you bought it because it's a cul-de-sac now, then those are going to be conversations we have to have, and they're difficult to have those. But it's important to sort of weigh those interests, right? The interests of the business owners who are there, the people who own property and their children are growing up there, and how are we moving? What is our traffic pattern? What is the burden there that is being put on other neighborhoods because of that? So I'm open to the conversation.
Paul.
Well, in my work as a map maker and geographer, I have done traffic studies before. It's something I've done actually quite a bit of work on. The quickest way to anger every single person in your ward is to change even minorly any aspect of the traffic configuration. You will be descended on by so many people that are so angry at you. No one likes the status quo is what they're used to, and even if, you could improve it by 100% and they're still going to hate it. The end caps at the end, and Michael is exactly right, and Shameless recollections are right, but you undersold, if not oversold. I was told that those in Shaw's history were the highest attended, with 1,200 people fitting into several places, and people were right down the line.
We have 1,201 in the house tonight, just for the record.
Right. I'm bad at crowd estimation. That's my Achilles heel. But the fact of the matter is, if you change that configuration, people will scream bloody murder. There's the cul-de-sacs, the end of Shaw, are not going away. The people there love them quite a bit. We could put some things through. Yes, absolutely. The underpass at Thurman, that could go away. Let me tell you how that came about. There was McCreetown before Botanical Heights. And there was when we were living in much more segregated neighborhoods, that was the African-American neighborhood, and that was blocked off by nervous whites that lived in Shaw because they didn't want people to have fast ingress and egress. Now, this is a configuration or a change to a configuration that would be very popular with my neighbors. To open that up again would be fantastic. Now Botanical Heights doesn't want it to open up. So I would work with Alderwoman Davis. I would poll her constituency. I would like to see what they would think about that, because I think that that would absolutely allow both neighborhoods to thrive, and that would be a good thing. Now, contrary to what people may have heard, the 8th Ward is not entirely Shaw. There's a lot of other places where things need to do. So in Southwest Garden, yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. In Southwest Garden, we're replacing one bridge soon. We have to figure out. We replaced another bridge. It took only about 4 years to do, and it's only half done now. Exactly. So I mean that speaks to the larger point that we can't just focus on Shaw and Shaw's needs. But there's some there's a Walgreens development that has it's going to cause, in my opinion, terrible. It's one of the most dangerous intersections in the city, according to people that I've seen the traffic study on. They want less curb cuts. I think that their request is entirely reasonable. I want to deliver it to them. That's one of the first. That's going to be the first thing on the agenda. I'm going to make sure that they that their traffic is made safe. So yes, if you need a traffic study, I can do it for you.
Okay. So it's almost Valentine's Day, and speaking of Valentine's Day, talking about some of the most loving and intimate relationships in our lives, let's talk about absentee and delinquent landlords. So, why? And, you know,
absence makes the heart grow fonder.
There's some absentee landlords that are very near and dear to my heart, Michael Allen, and you know exactly who I'm talking about. What would you do? So this is a question submitted from the audience. What would you do to push, and what would you do to deter landlords from sitting on vacant property? What would you do to dare I say, crack down on landlords who are mistreating their tenants? And how would you take action on that, not only in the 8th Ward, but in citywide? I think Annie is starting this time. Or no, Paul's starting this time.
All right. Well, yeah, the study of human behavior is the study of incentive. It's the study of inducements. You have to work with these landlords. It's less of a problem in our 3 neighborhoods now than it has been. It's still a problem. But in the 90s, we had people that no one was sure what they even looked like, that lived in Cleveland and lived in Pittsburgh and lived in Miami and owned 17 properties and never visited them, never kept them up. Nuisance property was used in some cases. Also, we are very, very lucky, not only in the 8th, but also in the 15th, to have the Tower Grove Neighborhoods Community Development Corporation, which acts and always has acted, which is an outgrowth of what was the Shaw Neighborhood Development Corporation, which was an outgrowth of the St. Margaret's of Scotland Development Corporation, which has done so much to stabilize all of our housing. Southwest Garden had a very active CDC, and Tower Grove East had at various times that, but the coalescing of that and leveraging our strengths, and with Sean, with great leadership, we've been able to disincent or to assemble the capital to buy out. As much as we would like to be able to have some kind of stick to beat the delinquent landlord out of the neighborhood, you have to have a carrot sometimes. Sometimes you just have to say, well, what will it take? We want to buy it. And they've used that inducement so effectively. I can't say that there are no delinquent landlords left in the 8th, but that's what you have to do. Sometimes you got to pay them to walk away from the table. Citywide, it's a little bit more complicated, but we have to make sure that a rising tide lifts all boats, that we have the opportunity to do that in other neighborhoods as well.
Yeah, so I think that the incentive, absolutely, if the organization has the money to be able to buy out those properties, then it's obviously the best bet, because then you've got the ability to renovate them. Tower Grove Neighborhood CDC is keeping some of their properties at lower income housing levels. It's still kind of high. It's not the lowest. It's not. I think it's 80% of median there, and it was a great purchase. But they had a massive influx of cash from a private bank that needed that, and so we're lucky to have those tools at our disposal. One of the things that I would like to look into is a tenant's bill of rights, and I think that's that's a protection that we need to have for people who are in vulnerable housing situations. So your lease can only protect you so far. We have very landlord-friendly laws in Missouri, and to be able to work to protect people, 51% of St. Louis rents, and that number is increasing, and that number is increasing nationwide as well. So to be able to put something on the books to say, an enforcement policy, say if this person doesn't have water, or if there's mold on the walls, or the tub isn't caulked and there's water leaking into this, and the amount of horrible situations that St. Louisans are living in because we don't have any protections for them are significant. And we have very few attorneys that do tenant defense law. It's our nonprofit organizations like the EHOC that are doing that kind of thing. So that's one of those ways, is empowering the people who are in those to be able to push back on their landlords and live in safe areas. So a tenant's bill of rights is something I want to get forward.
All right. I'll remind the House, if there's any we're getting to the end here, if there are any burning questions that haven't been asked, please write them down and send them forward. We're entering our final phase here. There have been a couple questions about the role of aldermen, and I don't know, they're all over the place, but they're all kind of to the point of, if the Board of Aldermen were a dance party for the last 50 years, most people have been huddled around the punch bowl gossiping when the DJ lays down the first track. But increasing over the years, I would argue that the alderwoman across the park is often the first person out on the floor trying to dance, maybe some new steps people aren't familiar with. A couple other aldermen have joined in. If you join this dance party, are you going to be on the wall around the punch bowl or out on the floor?
Another way to ask this question would be, what do you think your job will be when you're an alderman?
Well, those are two very different questions. Those are, if we can split those out. I think we're in agreement. We're going to split those out there. Okay. So I never really seen myself as a wallflower. I don't think that coming off the wall immediately when the music starts is my path. I think kind of figuring out the beat a little bit first before we get in is good. So you make sure that you're you don't look like you're completely out of the music. But I mean, I do think that we're in a situation where we need bold ideas, and we need people who are looking at best practices. And if there is something that's not working, just saying, well, this is the way it's always been done, is not really doing anybody any favors. We've got significant challenges in the city of St. Louis, and to look back and say, okay, we can learn from what is here, but also if it's not working, if we've been doing it this way for the past 20 years or even the past 5 years, and we can tell that it's not working, I don't think that there's any reason to be shy about offering some bold changes.
Paul?
All right. Well, except for the fast songs, I'm a punch bowl guy. But when the fast song comes out, I'm going to come out and dance. Does that make sense? I mean, it's a labored analogy you will allow, right?
Sure.
I mean, it is the fact.
It's the Royale.
You know what? You build the consensus to get your things done around that punch bowl. You need to get along with people. I mean, it's absolutely the case that one person walking in there to legislate with the purest heart and the best intentions and the best ideas can get nothing done without consensus. You got to spend some time around that punch bowl, and then when my song comes on, I'm on the dance floor. But but how are you going to learn? So no wallflowers here. So
can I ask a quick follow-up? If the president of the Board of Aldermen is a DJ, then what requests are you going to be putting in terms of tracks you want to be dancing to, aka committees you want to be serving on?
Oh,
so I was going to say country grammar again, but on the you're asking about committees.
Just very quickly, committees you might want to serve on.
Ways and Means, Public Safety, HUDs. I mean, that's not that I would absolutely. You can't go in, like I said in the thing, throwing haymakers. But these are three things that sync well with my skill set. These are ways that I can help the city immediately.
Annie?
I'd say if I had to pick three: legislation, rules, and the public safety committee. Mm-hmm.
All right.
Much like many persistent women all over the country, I kind of wanted an answer to my question. So, could you just describe, maybe in 2 sentences, what you think your job will be when you are an alderman?
Yeah. So, I think it's being present, accountable, and active, right? So being a part of the community, being here when people need you, being responsive to people's needs, and accountable for what you say you're going to get done, and is something getting done. And then active, meaning taking a leadership role, taking a big picture look at why, if someone has a need that keeps repeating, why is that need keeping repeating? Why are they not getting the services that they need from the Citizen Service Bureau? Why aren't they getting responded to? Because if you're not getting responded to here, then someone else isn't there as well. So we've got a bigger systemic issue to challenge. So it's the individual need, and then the systemic, how do we make changes on this big level?
I'll slightly disagree with my opponent. I think that present, accountable, and active are traits that you would like to have. But the job that you have at the Board of Aldermen is to legislate and to provide constituent services. Those are the two things. Legislate, provide constituent services. And the instance... Beg pardon? I actually honestly didn't hear...
Never responded to my questions.
Okay, well, this is
Okay, I'm not Steve Conway, so I don't know what to tell you.
So continue, Paul.
Okay. So legislate, provide constituent services. To legislate, you're going to be legislating 2 hours out of the week. The rule of thumb is 5 hours for every 1 hour you legislate, you're preparing to legislate. So that's 12 hours. Now, at the end of that, you have 30 hours left of work to do. You absolutely have to provide constituent services. You would miss it if they were gone. It's become fashionable in recent times for some alders, and I'm naming absolutely no names, to say, well, you didn't really hire me to trim those trees. You hired me to legislate. You hired them to legislate, but until we can find out a way to trim those trees, you are leaving your people in a lurch if you cannot give those 30 hours. I plan on being a full-time alderman. I plan on having office hours. You can come find me and you can give me a piece of your mind, or you can give me a pat on the back. You can give me whatever you want, but what I want you to give most is a task. Give me a task that I can knock out. That is something that maybe we shouldn't have to ask our alders to do, but it's not going away before redistricting for sure. For the next 4 hours, are we saying, well, we'll just try this where we don't really have constituent services, or somebody who's active that will come out and fix my dumpster and fix my sidewalk and make sure my lights are on? We cannot experiment with our public safety in that way. That's simply not the case. So the role is legislation, the role is also constituent services, and ignore either one or the other at the peril of your constituents. I'm going to focus on both.
Okay, so we're getting near to the end here. Andy, I'm going to allow you a 30-second response, because I think I didn't ask the question in a way that made both question answers answer in the same way. So Andy, 30-second response, then we have 3 more questions.
Sure, I would say that it's not... Nothing in my answer was about neglecting either one of those, and I want to be very clear about that. That just because I want you to also use the Citizen Service Bureau, that is a service that exists across the city, does not mean that I am not answering your phone call. That doesn't mean that I'm not also checking to make sure your dumpster did get followed through on. That we got the water mains on 39th Street fixed, right? Those holes have been there forever, and we finally have water back out. I made some phone calls early this week. I talked to Herb at the Water Division, and we've got people out there working on them right now. So those things can get done. And so I just want to be very clear that I'm not talking about neglecting those things, and those are things that I'm doing right now because I know how to connect people to services, and that's an important role there too.
We've talked about tax abatements and tax incentives, but another part of that, beyond the supply side of market rate housing, is the supply side of affordable housing. This is something that really hasn't been developed in the 8th Ward in the last few years. It hasn't, maybe been an issue at the forefront, but some would say that, studies like the Public Policy Research Center's report shows like 400% decrease in Section 8 vouchers in the Shaw neighborhood alone between 2000 and 2014. That affordable housing should be part of the mix. Do you have an affordable housing plan? Paul.
Yes, I do. Actually, it's been my pleasure to have learned a lot. I work for the last 2 years. Most of my working day has been spent in the service of the For the Sake of All project by the WashU Brown School of Social Work. And it has been studying implementation of inclusionary zoning, decrease of racial segregation and economic segregation, and access to health, specifically for City of St. Louis and St. Louis County. And so the AFFH guidelines, the Public Policy Research Center, it's very, very similar, but they use a different metric. They use an index score rather than a calculation that's based on 80% of median income. Who pays more than 30% of their income on housing? That's whether a renter or a homeowner. Now, I just put a lot of you to sleep, so I'll wake you back up. That's a complicated thing, but this is a metric with which HUD and AFFH determine what is a high cost housing burden or a low housing burden. Shaw neighborhood, and this is in flux, and our data goes back to 2015, mirrors the rest of the region in that way fairly closely. We're probably in the top 10% if you include county, but why would we cheat and include county, right? Because they're going to throw things off. So, I mean, it is the case that housing cost, especially rental housing cost, has gone up in the city of St. Louis, but it is not spiral, or in the Shaw neighborhood especially, but I want to branch that out to other places. It's gone up. I came in and had a $150 single bedroom apartment for 9 years. And let's just talk the absolute truth is that those days are in our rearview mirror. We're not going to get the $150 one bedroom Shaw apartment. That's not coming back. But we need to be able to keep our people in their houses and maintain the diversity that we have. There's various, I've gone on too long, but there's legislative ways that we can do that. With Andy's permission, maybe after her reply, I can expand on that only if you're interested and if it makes a difference. But
Andy.
Just we talked a little bit about the Tower Grove neighborhood CDCs buying up some properties and they're holding those at 80% of the median income. That is one way to do that. They're doing that in Tower Grove South, and we're blessed to have the CDC that's. They're doing a lot of really good work. We have the DeSales CDC over in Tower Grove East as well that is working to do that kind of work on that side of the ward as well. One of the specific things that we can do in the 8th ward is not giving away tax abatements on reducing multifamily homes to single-family homes, right? So that immediately drops your diversity, that drops your density, and it increases prices on your homes. And so being careful that we're intentional about how we're driving forward, right? We, when the DeTonti project went in, it was a new build on a vacant lot. Then the CDC countered with trying to buy up these properties to hold some of them at that 80% income, and hopefully their plan is to keep them there, even as other things around them go up, but to keep those at that rental value that they're at right now. I live in a rental that is not. It's not as affordable housing, but it is a pretty affordable apartment in Shaw, and the owner of my properties takes really good care of them. I'm fortunate to have that, but finding those are gems. They're, it's a diamond in the rough to find an apartment like that in a neighborhood like Shaw. I got really lucky when I moved in that I found exactly what I was looking for, just because I was able to put a deposit down that day and I was able to pass a background check. And so there are things that we can do when we're tenant screening to make sure that we're letting as many people into these as need to get into these units, and we're not. We're incentivizing landlords to keep things at a reasonable rate. Just because you can raise the rent doesn't mean that isn't necessarily the best thing too. And part of that is working towards a plan for how we go forward on these things. So I think that there are ways to address it. The tax incentives for sure, programs with the CDCs to try to keep quality lower income housing, and making sure that people are accepting Section 8 vouchers when they're there. It is illegal to reject someone just because they're a Section 8 voucher holder. So you need to make sure that that's being enforced as well, and that keeps some of our diversity, that keeps some of our density and our affordable housing.
Okay, this is our, and we're gonna do one final question and then closing comments. Okay, final question is flashback to the trauma of the second presidential debate, but a real question. Why would you vote for your opposing candidate here? What do you like about your opposing candidate? What do you support about them as a candidate and as a person? And I think, Annie, you're up first.
Yeah. So I've had the pleasure of working with Paul with the 8th Ward Independent Democrats, and we didn't run together for that, but we've worked pretty well together since then, and I think Paul's ability to take the numbers and give them to people to make that accessible, make the data accessible to people, is a really useful skill. It's been really useful for the Democratic Party to figure out where people are registered to vote, who's voting for which candidates and things like that, and that is really good data. Yeah, it's. I think that with all of the vitriol that's happening online, we don't have that for each other, and so I just want to make sure that is clear with everyone here as well. And I think both of us intend to continue to work together regardless of who wins. That we both have active roles to play regardless of who wins.
Paul?
I also have enjoyed getting to know Annie much better over the last 18 months, probably 2 years or so. I know her to be a brilliant person. I know her to be a very hard worker, very passionate person. Take the bitter with the sweet. The thing that I'm worried about is the ability to deliver constituent services to the ward as a part-time alderman. I will be her full-time alderman. It is the case that 12 hours of legislating makes a pretty high-paying part-time job, and this is not to say that she would ignore it, but this has my dawn to dusk attention. This is, at the very least, after you've legislated, you have 20, on a short week, you have 20 hours worth of work to do to make sure that this ward looks good. Sometimes 30, sometimes 40. So all that being said, I find nothing to dislike about Annie personally. I find her to be a brilliant person. I find her to be a hard worker and have a good heart, and I mean that very sincerely.
All right, we're going to wrap it up with 1 minute closing statements. Anything you don't think we covered, anything you want to say, anything you think should stick in the mind of someone in the house about you on their way out the door? And we'll start with Paul. 1 minute.
One thing I would like all of you to remember about me, even long after I'm dead, I hope I live a long and productive life, is that I love this city and I love all 317,000 people in it. It is the case that I have been in 400 church basements all over the, doing Q&A for Pruitt-Igoe, and every single interaction I have with any St. Louisan that I haven't met invigorates me and makes me love this city even more. The other thing that you should know is that I think many people find somebody who knows me. If you don't, like Andy said, social media can distort things quite a bit. I'm not sure that Facebook is really helping this debate or this whole election. But find somebody who knows me. It can even be somebody who doesn't support me. Find somebody who knows me. They will tell you that I'm a sincere person, that I'm an honest person, a humble person, a respectful person, and a person who puts work behind anything that he says and always keeps his word. You will find that even among people who are not supporting me. So if you are on the fence, I would like to ask you very sincerely for your vote. I want to ask each and every man and woman in the 8th Ward for their vote, and I want to show you over the next however many years why you cast a good vote and why I hope to earn it. So thank you.
All right. Almost a perfect minute. Annie.
So my career has been about service, has been about where can I use my skills to do the most good for the most people, and that was the ministry, that was heading to law school. I have clients who depend on me. They're life and death situations for some of these folks, and I also work for a law firm that supports my desire to move into this service. Right, that they're both Shaw residents, and I'm going to have the time to serve the residents of Shaw and the needs of the 8th Ward. Your needs are outside of 9 to 5 hours. They're outside of business hours. The needs of my clients currently are outside of those, and I work within those bounds very easily. I'm currently working 2 jobs. One of those will go away if this happens, so it'll be 1 job plus then alderman. I have that time. I have that passion. I'm here because I deeply love St. Louis, and I know you do too. And I think facilitating connections between people and services is important, so that I want you to have my phone number. I want you to be able to call me, but I don't think you should have to. But I also want to connect you to other people who are doing great things as well. We are all siloed in the things that we work on here in St. Louis. We're all passionate about the things that we do. If we were talking to each other, if I can help facilitate those relationships so we're working together, we can do a whole lot more. So I would appreciate your vote on February 13th as well.
Thank you, candidates.
All right. So thank you all for your stupendous participation. I want to let you know that we got a lot of questions, and if you feel like your question was neglected, charge it to the boundaries of time and space and not to our hearts, as the old saying goes.
Right. Catch these candidates afterwards. They'll be around. I'm sure they will spend all the time they want
in a polite and
to get your vote,
non-violent way. And then if you have any thoughts or feelings about our Royale podcast, be sure to subscribe.
Right.
And
Right.
follow us for more invigorating debates.
Right.
Hopefully one day a candidate, we can see if all candidates in the future agree with Country Grammar as the anthem, and we could get this going. All right, thanks
Also,
all.
one other thing, if you're watching this on the live stream and need to replay some of the moments, it will be out as a podcast on nextstl.com before the election on Tuesday. So
Happy
catch
voting.
the podcast, re-listen, make your choice. I would never encourage anyone to decide this early. You still have until Tuesday to make your choice.
Vote early, vote often, as the old saying goes. Good night, everyone.
Thank you.
Did it. Good deal. Live from Washington University, it's the presidential debate.
Oh my God.
Oh my goodness. Partisanship over what?
Sorry, what'd you say?